Okay, so today, I'm going to be talking you through the general strategy that I played when I got my 100 plus 4Ks in a row. Currently, we're on 118 on Twitch, so if you want to go follow that and keep up to the 4K streak, the link to my Twitch is in the description. It would be greatly appreciated. So, this streak could go to 200, it could go to 300, we could lose it on 119, I have absolutely no idea. I'm going to be talking you through the rough strategy that I played, the play style, the kind of things I went for, and anything that I, didn't really cover in the nurse guide or how to play nurse, but just how I roughly played and my playstyle in this streak. So to start off with perks, I ran Corrupt Intervention to slow down the early game to make sure that they couldn't hop on a gen straight away, and to restrict the area of play for the first 2 minutes of the game to the 4 active gens, which is only a small portion of the map. It's an area where I can much easily monitor and make sure that the ruin is doing its work and getting the gens down to 0%. Second perk I used was Ruin. To try and use the best out of this perk, I tried my hardest to get a chase in my active gens in the first 2 minutes of the game, so that the 4 gens that were active were working down just by naturally me chasing in the area, because the survivors would get off gens to deny me an easy hit, that kind of thing. I then used my third perk, which was Undying. Undying's second ability, which is when people are within a small radius of the totem. It shows me where they are and shows me their auras. That helped me find a lot of people in the early game, which was really useful to me. But on top of that, it tended to make the ruin last for the entire game, and sometimes they would have up to 4 to 5 totem pops before my ruin would even be out of the game. But it pretty much made that my ruin was alive for most games for all of the game. And the most controversial perk was the fourth perk, which was Whispers. A lot of people came in saying, why not Infectious, why not Deerstalker, why not many other things. But it basically, in my mind, completely secured that I got the 4K and not a 3K. Basically, if I ever was in a situation where I had to close hatch, there was no way they would get the doors because I knew I would know where they were. If I ever had one slugged and couldn't find the other one, I would be able to go around the map and see where my Whispers procced and where it didn't, to try and work out where the last survivor was. Even if they were hiding in a locker or whatever, I basically would be able to find someone, and I never struggled in a situation where I would have to drop someone back on their feet just because I couldn't find the other person. I could just go around the map with my Whispers, and eventually I would find the last person just off of a Whispers proc. And general playstyle. So basically, I touched on it before, I would always try to chase in my active gens and get a hook in my active gens as close to the center of all 4 gens as possible, so that I could just, the maximum gens I wanted to let in this time before Corrupt was done was 1, and that would only be if it was really far from the hook. I would try my best to keep all 4 being tagged down by Ruin, because as the nature of Ruin is it regresses the gen by 200%, and survivors work on the gen at 100% speed. So, if I take a survivor off a gen with Ruin active for 4 seconds, it will take them 8 seconds to get that progress back on the gen that it was before. So a gen will fully regress in 40 seconds. And 40 seconds is pretty easy to push someone off a gen for, even 10 seconds, 20 seconds, 5 seconds. It just puts them back by a lot of time, and Dead by Daylight, famously known as, is a game of seconds. You will win the game based off of seconds, you will lose the game based off of seconds. If they make it so that 3 gens are popped in 80 seconds, which is the most optimal thing to do, or 4 gems are popped in 80 seconds, which is the most optimal thing to do, then your seconds are going to become a lot lower. But if you were running Sloppy Tanner holding pressure, and they had to do an extra 20% on every gen because you had a tag on everyone, then all of a sudden their gens are 96 seconds rather than 80 seconds, and you're just trying to make as many seconds in the game as possible so that you can do your work, you can get the survivor out, and then you can make it into a 3v1 situation or a 2v1 situation, or you can 12 hook the survivors depending on your playstyle. My playstyle tended to be as optimal on hooks as possible. If they let the survivor hang for 40 seconds on the hook, I would try my best to force them into stage 2. If they let the survivor hang for 40 seconds in stage 2, I would try to force the survivor into death. I would not allow them to get a optimal hook save, which is in the last 10 to 20 seconds of the hook state. I would try to force it over. As well as that, once I had a survivor out of the game, whether I needed to tunnel them or just camp them into the next state, I would then find the other 3 survivors, and I would pretty much do a slugging game if they were close to each other. And if I held a general game where I held a lot of pressure and I had a lot of hook states, I would just try and hook someone out of the game as quick as possible. Like if I had 2 people death hook, I'd kill one, I would try and kill the other, and then make it into a 2v1 scenario which pretty much completely deads the game unless there is one gen left. So as quickly as possible we would try to get one survivor out, and then after that, depending on what happened, we would try and slug, because even if you are slugging, if people aren't in the area, you don't really need infectious for it. If you're holding good pressure, the other survivor will need to come across to pick the slugs up. They can't just leave them. And if they do just leave them, that's when your whispers will come into play. You'll be able to find the last survivor who isn't slugged and go and take them, find them, put them on the floor, and then it will be GG because you would have your 3 slugs and all you need to do is hook them. So how did I play the late game to deny hatch? This is something that isn't really covered on YouTube because as when Otstava did his streak, he did it for wins, which didn't include hatch. But basically how I played around hatch is if there was ever a key in the game, we tried to end it as quick as humanly possible, normally by a 4-man slug and the first 2 gens being completed, because hatch does take a while or take a few gens for it to be spawned in the first place. So if the hatch hasn't spawned, then the person cannot get hatch with a key. Secondly, we often tried to bleed out survivors in the end game. We would often let, if it was a 2-slug scenario and they weren't close to each other, we would just go to the survivor with the lowest bleed out on the slug. We would wait for the one with the lowest bleed out to bleed out, and we would hook the one with the highest bleed out as soon as the survivor bled out, giving them no chance for any attempts, even if it was their first hook, because the game would be considered over by the daylight, and then, you know, they would be killed on hook, and that would be that. So often in the end game, it was a case of 1 survivor bleeding out, or 2 survivors bleeding out, and getting a hook on the last one. Because in this 4K streak, all that counts is that nobody has escaped your lobby, not how you killed them or anything like that. The only thing that is not allowed is Moris and DC for hatch. So that was my general strategy on how I did my 4K streak. I hope it helps you guys in your games on 4King more consistently and the kind of thing that you have to do to get those 4Ks against the best teams. I really hope you enjoyed watching. If you did, please do consider subscribing. Thank you so much, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.